Okay, so let's dive into it. I want to share something juicy with you guys, an anonymous tip with some big updates. Now, to preamble this, I think that it's important to remember that, like I said, I get a lot of tips, regarding news or information in the ecosystem, whether you want to call it like insider info or whatever it might be. And 95% of it, I don't share just because especially if it's someone who wants to remain anonymous. It's like the name of the show, is the credibility, right? I kind of have to put the name of the show, in the line just because I can't speak to the credibility of a source a lot of times. So I don't think I've ever really done something like this on the show before. And most of these folks just don't wish to be identified. So the other side to it is if a source isn't if I can't verify it, or if it's not super credible or whatever it may be, sometimes there's just no point. I just don't think it's useful. And to be really clear, I never, ever share information that people tell me in confidence. This is only stuff that people will give me explicit written permission to share information on the show, very clear, and may also make it clear how they want to be identified, all that kind of stuff. So there's just standard journalistic, protocols that you do with this kind of stuff. And it's not like this is it's not earth shattering. But yeah, this is one instance where I can put the show's name, behind the credibility of the source. And I've been given permission to share this information, but under the condition the source remains anonymous. So that's basically it. So what's going on? Well, basically, so the source that I have is a high-ranking individual within the Hedera ecosystem. And I verified their identity. I know their identity. They're highly credible. I will not be sharing any information about the source, so don't ask me. So basically, what's the scoop? What's the information? So here's the info, and I've tried to organize it in a way that makes sense. And for valid reasons, the source was unable to go into extreme detail, but it's information that I think is useful enough that, this time I'm doing something a little different. So basically what we know, or what I know, is the source says there is a substantial pipeline for Hedera in April, including a very institutional access point. So what does that mean? Well, what I've been able to piece together is an institutional access point in the context of crypto, or a crypto token, refers to a platform or service or gateway that allows institutional investors, maybe think of a bank or a hedge fund or a financial service firm or whatever, to participate in the cryptocurrency market. And the key thing here is this isn't a regular exchange or whatever. It is as it's described, an institutional access point is designed to meet regulatory, security, operational needs of institutional investors. So it's very stringent. And in this climate now where literally just this week, or literally just yesterday, we saw the SEC banging down on KuCoin, you can understand that institutional investors are really wanting to get into this industry, into crypto, and are slowly running out of options. And so now we're starting to see institutional access points for Bitcoin, for Ethereum, in kind of new ways, especially with these ETFs. And then as it comes to HBAR specifically, as it comes to Hedera specifically, that's what this source is communicating to me, is this is something specific to Hedera arriving in April. So that's exciting. And that's kind of part of that pipeline. The other thing is, the source did give clear indication that they believe the items in this April pipeline could have an impact on price, essentially kind of attesting to their significance. And I mean, we've seen stuff like this before. We've seen announcements in the past affect price, like we saw recently, the Hashgraph Association, Saudi news, and we saw with Drop and Fed Now. We saw that impact HBAR price directly. So the implication here from the source is essentially this April pipeline, including the institutional access point, is substantial enough to do that. That's what I've inferred from our conversation. Now, the other piece to this is the sources said there is a monster use case dropping in Q3, if all stays on schedule. That was all the detail provided. And I mean, it's very in line with it. It doesn't feel like breaking news that there's information like this, but what it does do is I hope it provides the community some kind of confluence to other information we've had, and kind of other things that we've seen folks talk about. And so this is a kind of a confirmation of that yes, Q3, there is a monster use case dropping. I think the main question immediately in my mind is, okay, so I think about a monster use case. Obviously, the direct analog to that is Atma.io, right? The use case that's driving, throughput on the network, right? The definition of a monster use case so far is, 1,500 TPS. So the question in my mind when it comes to this, the information the source gave me is, is this going to be a subsidized use case, or is this going to be the first major use case that is kind of, powered under its own steam? That's going to be very interesting to see. So that was another thing. And I think that was kind of really the main piece of information. And then as well, over the conversation, the source expressed an overall kind of positive sentiment, that there has been a lot of change at the top levels of the ecosystem. And I think that we're all kind of, sensing that. I think that that's a top of mind conversation that a lot of people have been having, in the Hedera community and in the ecosystem, of feeling like there's a lot of change, feeling like there's a lot of pivoting. And I think that sometimes it feels off the mark, but I do think that, there's a lot of change happening. And so I think that what this does is it in some ways confirms that at the top, there is definitely positive change happening. And that was definitely something that was, directly kind of touched on. So really that's the information here. And again, this is a source that I've, that I know the identity of, that I've verified, and that I deem highly, highly credible. Not going to be sharing any other info about the source. But quick summary of the information shared is, there is a very substantial pipeline for April, including a very institutional access point, which is very exciting to me, because even though it may not be directly related to a governing council thing or a use case thing, when we say institutional access point, we're talking about some big stuff. And an April pipeline, with other announcements coming as well. That's what the source implied as well. It's like collectively enough to impact price. It was very evident that was what they were implying. And again, the source said there is a monster use case dropping in Q3 if all stays on schedule. Again, wasn't clear what kind of use case it would be or what it was related to. They have valid reasons to be unable to provide further details, but I'm just deeming the source highly credible. And so that's really kind of the drop here. And we're going to have to see what other people say, what other information we can corroborate. But like I said, this stuff happens frequently. People reach out to me, either anonymously or, just directly with information or, insider info, whatever it may be. And I just really don't share it usually, just because, again, like I can't maybe verify it, or I just don't deem it like super useful. But just, this is different. And I would just say, remember that this is for everybody, this is an anonymous source. So I would say only trust this information as much as you trust the show. There's nothing else that I can do to lend to the credibility. All you can do is kind of take the show and do your own due diligence. And again, like I said before, I really don't do this kind of thing normally. This is just an extenuating circumstance. So take that as you will. My thoughts are, it's funny, like when I name these shows, I do it usually on a Monday, and I try to think about what the theme of the week is. And this week was, should we be thinking bigger? And when I get tips like this, it definitely kind of makes me feel that way. And it's not just this situation, it's also just stuff that I've been seeing, stuff that we've, been seeing in the public that's launching, and also dialogue, debates, everything. And I think that's the general theme for me, is the need to think bigger. I think that for me, bear market's been tough. The last few years have been tough, I think, for a lot of people just staying alive in Web3. We've seen a lot of great projects not make it. We've seen a lot of businesses fail. And we've seen, major global banks fail and all that kind of stuff. So I think there's been a lot that's happened. And a lot of people have had to, whether you're an investor or a builder, you've had to build up this callous and this attitude to survive. And I think that is going to create a lot of opportunity cost for people going into this new phase of the industry, when really things feel like they're kind of opening up and you don't want to be closed, right? And so I think that the thing that kind of struck me is, like, we got to think bigger. And even a few things in my personal life have kind of got me thinking that way. And so that was just sitting around kind of trying to think of what to call the show. That's kind of, I think, a big takeaway here. The other thing is, we should expect some curveballs. It's clear to me, even just from like public information, not just from, the tip shared with me, is like, there are just big changes happening in the ecosystem. And I don't know if folks at the top are really aware, are really sure of what's exactly going to happen. I think that's exciting. I think that's fresh. I think that we've been operating in the Hedera ecosystem very much as kind of like on the rail, right? And it's enterprise, we're the adults in the room. There's a plan, but as we've seen, it's like right now, especially this year, we're learning more and more that, like, how much is that worth? We don't know. What's generating revenue for the network? Meme coins and degen stuff. I'm pretty sure, Saucer Swap potentially makes almost as much or just as much or more money than Hedera. And that's the reality of it, that retail is driving adoption and innovation. There is enterprise stuff that's so important, but I think there's just going to be curveballs. I think if you still have the same investment thesis on Hedera that you had years ago, you're setting yourself up for major pain. I think that these curveballs are going to be good ones. I don't think it's the case of curveballs where it's like, oh no. I think it's a curveball of like, oh no. I don't know how else to describe it. I think that we run the risk of not being ready for those. Again, not thinking bigger, being too closed off. I think that you got to be ready for those, because the curveballs are sometimes where the opportunity lies. And I think that also, as I was kind of thinking about this and just reflecting also on just like, again, all the public information out there and what's happened this year, and then extrapolating on that and kind of being like, what could happen, but also like what has happened over the last years, like what has been that historical growth trajectory. And what I kind of reminded myself was, we definitely for sure run the risk of overestimating what Hedera's trajectory could look like as a network, right? And I think that's a conversation we're having in the community right now. I think that's the overall theme, is don't overestimate Hedera. We might be overestimating Hedera, we need to temper expectations. We need to be realistic. We need to, you know, we need to be aware of this stuff. So I think that that's been a big message that's been talked about in the ecosystem is being careful to not overestimate, Hedera's trajectory. But the other thing is there's also an equal risk of underestimating Hedera's trajectory in a very real way. And because we just don't have access to a lot of information, like literally we don't have access to a lot of this insider information. And so we often just are using what's publicly available. And sometimes that means, waiting 90 days for for Hedera meeting minutes and stuff like that. So I think that was, as I was kind of deliberating with myself on how to present this info that was shared with me by this source, I think that that's what this is about for me. Is it's just maybe a reminder that as much as we're being cautious to not overestimate Hedera's trajectory, and maybe for sure it's been overestimated in the past, I think that it's also fair to say that things change, and there has been big change that's happened at the top of this ecosystem and community in recent months, and I think that there is a real risk of underestimating Hedera's trajectory that we should always kind of be aware of. So that's kind of my takeaways from this information shared. We're going to move on to some news stories. Please don't ask me about who the source is. Not interested in talking about that. More than happy to, have chats about the information that was shared with me and that I just kind of shared on the show. And very curious to see what other people think about it, if they've heard similar things, and what other stuff we can get to the bottom of. I know Hedera is a very resourceful research group, so I love stuff like this, and I'm happy I was able to share it. Please don't expect stuff like this on the show regularly, and please don't expect to share tips with me and have me share it on the show. It's just not something I usually do, because most of those are not that compelling and not that useful. This one was, so I shared it. And like I said, trust the information as much as you trust the show. That's kind of what this is about. Now, I love, Tamara says, don't overestimate and don't underestimate Hedera's trajectory. Got it. Yeah, I know it definitely sounds like it doesn't make sense, but that's really where it is. Like, that's really what this is about. Like, that's what all of this is about, is trying to find yourself at that perfect spot, right? Of like being realistic and on the nose, but also not like underestimating. It's the most difficult thing to do. And I've found that right now the ecosystem, rightfully so, and the community, rightfully so, has formed a very kind of strong bias more to the underestimate side, which I think is healthy, because I think that for a fair period of time, there was a strong bias to overestimating Hedera's trajectory. And I think that the pendulum's kind of swung the other way. And so I just think it's just being aware of that. It's not like it's never going to be perfect. No one's ever going to kind of be right there, but just I'm being aware of it, that the pendulum's swinging on that. And so I'm being conscious for myself of like, okay, but there are some crazy things that can happen, some curveballs. But anyways, enough of that. Let's talk about a new use case coming to Hedera that I literally just learned about right before starting the show, and I've done zero research on it. And I'm going to have a quick sip of my kombucha. I thought this was going to be a crazy flavor because it's blue, but this is like literally just the unflavored variety. I have no idea why the flavored versions are like different colors, and they decided to make the fun color the like plain one. I don't know. Anyways, it's blue. Abu Dai. Everyone grab a bevy, have a drink of water, stay hydrated, and we'll dive into our next story.